There is a garden, there is a city, and there's a kingdom of God. And it is beautiful, and he is bringing it right now into our midst. Hey, we are in week number 3, week number 1 of our reJesus series. This is a theme, the Jesus I never knew and the Jesus I need to know. So who is this Jesus? And the questions were, who are the people saying that Jesus is? What's the word on the street? And then the second question is, well, who do you say that Jesus is? How do you experience Jesus? Week number 2, we looked at the better way of Jesus, and particularly John chapter 14, verse 6. And there the question was, well, what does Jesus say about himself? Who does Jesus claim to be? Now this week, the theme is just a little more complicated, so let me read it and you'll be able to pick it up on your devotional resources program when you walk out. But here's the theme. Jesus is in charge around here. That's dangerous talk. It was very dangerous then, and it's still dangerous right here and right now. So, Jesus is in charge. That's our theme for today. So here's kind of the question. Is what does it mean for Jesus to be in charge, and is he in charge, and should he be in charge, and how does Jesus get to be in charge? That's sort of our questions for today. But we have a bit of a problem right at the very beginning. So let me just take a couple minute detour and tell you what our problem is, and that is words and language. Words are actually containers of meaning. We download meaning into a word, and when we say a word, that word communicates a whole bunch of stuff to us. And so words contain meaning that help us experience reality and then talk to others about that reality. And what happens is for the things that matter the most, we tend to develop a pretty rich, extensive, nuanced vocabulary because those things matter. We want to have a lot of ways that we can talk about the stuff that matters the most and how we experience reality. So let me give you an example. In the Arabic language has about 100 words for camel, because that's their world, that's their reality. Now, I don't live in the world of camels, and so therefore I have one word for camel. It's the word ugly. No, they're kind of cute, aren't they? I have one word for camel. It's the word camel, because camels are not a part of my reality, so I don't need many words to load meaning into this thing called camel. But in the Arabic world, where camels were a part of life, they have lots of vocabulary. At one time, they had over 1,000 words having to do with camels. That's amazing. Let me come to something a little closer to home. So the Inuit Eskimos, they have about 50 different words for snow. Now, I've got a handful of words for snow because we have a little bit of snow around here. So I have snow, ice, sleet, hail. Every now and then we have a blizzard. I've got the word nor'easter. I talked to an individual who moved in from another part of the country, and they were asking, well, what's the weather like around here in the winter? And I said, hey, it's really not usually too bad unless we get a nor'easter. And they said, what's a nor'easter? And I smiled and said, you'll find out. But you see, where they were from, they didn't have that reality, so they didn't need a word to load meaning into it. When Becky and I moved to upstate New York, we moved to a place of the United States that gets a whole lot more snow, and we learned a couple words that I never knew before. One of the words was the word whiteout. Now, I just thought whiteout was a little stuff that came in a little bottle and you put it on mistakes, but no. A whiteout means that there is such a total, a massive amount of snow coming down that the world disappears around you. Everything becomes white. You can't see anything. And the first time I was in a whiteout, I almost passed out from sheer fright. It was terrible what was going on. But once you have that word, now you can load in meaning. When they say there's going to be whiteouts today, then you want to be very, very careful and take cautions. And here's another word I never knew existed called lake effect. Well, what's lake effect? Well, lake effect, and we were affected by Lake Ontario. Lake effect is when the lake hasn't frozen over and these storms are coming in and they're picking up all this extra moisture and they're dropping it south of the lake, on Buffalo, on Rochester, east of the lake, on Syracuse and the Tug Hill Plateau, and just drops massive amounts of snow in a very short time. I learned those two words, and I learned to hate those two words, by the way. But you see, not living there, I didn't need words to contain meaning that wasn't a part of my reality. It probably won't surprise you guys that the English language, we have well over 100 words for slang to talk about money. Because money is important to us. We're always thinking about money. I have over 100 words. Just go on the internet and Google slang words for money and you'll get lists of what those words are. But here's why I took a little bit of time to talk about that. And that is that we are losing certain words. We're losing words that we used to have and used to really know what they meant. We're losing words about spirituality. We're losing words about faith. We're losing words about religion. We're losing words about God. We're losing words about morality and virtue. I mean, there is actually a decline going on of those kinds of words. A week or so ago, I put up a little on my Facebook, I put up a word from David Brooks. David Brooks has this to say: many adults, you and I, we hunger for meaning and goodness, but we now lack a spiritual vocabulary to think things through. You see, when you don't have words that can't contain the meaning that you need about the realities that you'd like to experience, those words are disappearing. I actually found that in a little book called Learning to Speak God from Scratch. Very, very clever, creative book. And Brooks and a few others, they have done some studies of the percentage and frequency of use of words in our culture and in our Western world. There are just words that are going down, down, down. So here all these words have declined in the last number of years. Grace, mercy, wisdom, faith, honesty, righteousness, evil. They've been going down. And they're not even the really deep spiritual words like atonement and sanctification. And I mean, those much more complex religious words, they've really, really gone away. But then he went on and said, but even the words that we used to use to talk about virtue, morality, they're going down. So they have like these clusters of words. So all the words associated with humility, they have actually declined by 52%. The compassion cluster of words have dropped by 56%. And the gratitude words, they've dropped down almost in half by 49%. So it's not even an issue of religious words, spiritual words, but it's words that we used to have to talk about virtue, things that ought to be important, like humility, like compassion, like gratitude. I mean, we're losing slowly our vocabulary to talk about those things. Now, why that's so significant is because today, Jesus in charge, what we're trying to do is find some language that we can talk about a reality that in the Bible is everywhere. There's certain words that are going to be used to describe Jesus. That is our focus today. That back then for Jesus, those words were commonplace. It was the way they spoke. It was part of their meaning. And it made sense to them, but those words don't make nearly as much sense for us today. And in fact, I was paying attention because our worship songs this morning were loaded with some of those words that are no longer making as much sense for our culture. So let me just show you what these words are by giving you a couple different passages from the Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We're going to get at least one passage from each. So the Lord's Prayer starts out by saying, "Our Father in heaven," and of course that word heaven, what in the world does that mean? But "Our Father in heaven, hallowed." Whoever uses that, holy is another translation. Holy be your name. Your kingdom come. Now, right there's the word kingdom. What is a kingdom? And why does it need to come on earth as it is in heaven? Why does that need to happen? That's in Matthew. Now we go a couple verses later in Matthew chapter 6, where Jesus says, above all else, make this your number one priority in life, seeking first the kingdom. So above all, I'm supposed to seek something that I don't even know exactly what it is. What is a kingdom? Let me come to the Gospel of Mark. And when Jesus began his public ministry going about in Galilee, he was proclaiming the good news, and we all want to hear good news. What's the heart of the good news? Well, the kingdom of God is near. What's that mean? It's near. It's not here yet. It's near. And repent. Well, repent from what? How? What's that? And believe and follow. I mean, language that used to be, everybody understood it, now is getting a little more vague. Let's go to the Gospel of Luke with a slightly different word. Now Jesus is talking to people and he says, why do you call me Lord, Lord? And we talked about Lord this morning in one of our worship songs. Why do you call me Lord and you don't do what I say? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. If I'm the Lord and you're not doing what I say, what's that all about? Jesus is asking. Lord? Who has lords today? And then we go to John and the Gospel of John, and near the end of the Gospel of John, where Jesus is having this striking conversation with Pilate, who is himself a very significant leader, ruler in that time. Let's pull up here. So you are a king then, said Pilate, after some of the conversation had gone on. And Jesus said, you're right in saying I'm a king. In fact, for that reason, to be a king, I was born and came into this world. I mean, that language is everywhere. In fact, if you would go and just kind of skim through the Gospels, you're going to find king, Lord, kingdom is used 360 times in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You can't get away from the language. It appears 4 times in every chapter on average, 4 times. It's the common language. And today it feels kind of archaic. And you'll read words like majesty and sovereign. I always used to love to talk about the sovereignty of God. What's that mean? And you'll read about thrones and crowns. I mean, stuff that's, unless you're watching the Game of Thrones, maybe you know what some of that is. Unless maybe you watched the Crown miniseries about Queen Elizabeth that was on. I mean, but those things just seem removed from us. They don't seem quite real. They don't seem, I mean, after all, we fought a war called the American Revolution, so we wouldn't have to do that king thing, so we could get away from lords and kingdoms. And yet that's the language of the New Testament. That's the language of a reality about Jesus. Who the people say I am, who do you say I am, who does Jesus say he is? Well, king, Lord, kingdom, it's right there. And we don't quite get it anymore. And so what happens is people go and look for some other language that might be another container for that ancient meaning. Lori Beth Jones was a motivational speaker a number of years back. She wrote a book called Jesus CEO. And people got upset with her. Why are you using a business term to describe who Jesus is? Well, I mean, she's just trying to find some language that maybe we're a little more familiar with. If you don't like chief executive officer, call Jesus the chief everything officer. That's what he is. The chief everything officer is what we're trying to get. Find some more language. She wrote another book called Jesus Entrepreneur. Well, we all kind of know what entrepreneurs are. They're those people that are motivated to come and start something brand new that doesn't exist and get it launched off in the world. And so Jesus, entrepreneur. Okay, kind of get that. Another person wrote a book called Jesus for President. And it was actually quite a good book. Very, very good book. But it also falls a little short because, we have more powers than president. We have presidents, we have judges, we have Senate, we have all kinds of people. And so there's a distribution of powers. And so even the word president doesn't quite capture, but, maybe it helps us. I'll tell you though, where I have found an enormous amount of help is just in that simple language, Jesus is in charge. Let me read a couple of lines. I was going to try and paraphrase it for you guys, but it's just too good. It's from Simply Jesus by N.T. Wright, a very one of the most renowned New Testament scholars in the world. I usually don't recommend his books because they're just a little harder. Here's what he says. Just listen to the language, the imagination. We'll have a couple of these words up on the screen, and then I'm going to continue with a few that aren't on the screen. Throughout his short public career, it lasted about 3 years, Jesus spoke and acted as if he was in charge. Jesus did things people didn't think you were allowed to do, and he explained them by saying, well, yes, he did indeed have the right to do them. Jesus behaved as if he had the right and even the duty to take over, to sort things out, to make his country and perhaps even the wider world a different, a better place. And it wasn't very long before his closest followers told him that they thought he really was in charge, or at least he ought to be. He was the king they'd all been waiting for. Now, you might have thought, and people certainly did at the time, that Jesus' untimely death dashed all their hopes once and for all. But not long after his death, his associates started to claim that he was now in charge for real. And they started to act as if it was true. Because Jesus was about a God who is so much bigger than the ordinary God of our modern religion. You see, this word called God is a container for meaning, and we can't even load enough meaning into the word today. The really striking thing about Jesus then and now is that he seems not only to have been talking about this much bigger God, but actually launching the transformative new project that God had planned all along. What's that transformative new project that the world needs? It's the kingdom of God. Jesus launched it. He is in charge. And they go on. It's just beautiful, beautiful language. Jesus spoke and acted and did things as if he was in charge, as if he was to take over and start to put right what had gone so wrong. That's what it means to be in charge of everything. So here are the two questions. What would it really look like if Jesus were actually in charge today as he was then? And secondly is, well, why should Jesus be in charge? Now, that first question, what would it look like if Jesus were really in charge of our lives? I'm going to come back to that at the very end and only say something very, very brief about it, but it'll make a lot of sense. But I'd like to spend just a little more time because I think I actually need to convince us that Jesus should be in charge. Let me just spend a little bit of time and give you a few reasons why Jesus should be in charge. The first two are closely connected, and the second two reasons are closely connected. Here's the first reason. There's always a king. There's always a king. There's always somebody in charge. The last book of the book of Judges, and Judges is one of the history books in the Bible. You know, the first couple books, and there's the book of Joshua talking about going into the promised land. Then there's the book of Judges, which talked about the early rule in Israel. But the last verse in the book of Judges says, there was no king in Israel, and everybody did what seemed right in their own eyes. No king, and so everybody was doing right what was in their own eyes. Well, here's what really happens. When there's no king, that means that everybody's a king. If there's no real king in charge of all things, and everybody starts saying, well, then I'll be king, or I'll be queen, and I'll take charge of things. Back in the 1980s, there was a really interesting book written about American culture, and it was called Habits of the Heart, written by a Christian sociologist. And as he studied the culture, Christian and non-Christian, he said, you know, we actually need to come up with a new religion for today. Let's call it Sheilaism. You say, what in the world is Sheilaism? Well, really what he did, almost at random, is he picked the word Sheila and he added ism. He picked the name Sheila and added ism to it. You know, Sheilaism means Sheila's in charge. Sheila's the king. In this case, Sheila's the queen. Sheila's the boss. Sheila makes the decisions. Sheila chooses. Sheila is the one who determines what's right. Sheila determines what's good. Sheila determines what's true and what's beautiful. And Sheila's in charge of that, and nobody else can tell Sheila she's wrong. Well, we have Sheilaism today, which means we have Brianism and Daveism and Angieism and Sueism, and you just take any name and tack a little ism on the end, and that's our religion for today. That's who's in charge today. We all think as if we are in charge. And so we are going about acting as if we're the ones who call the shots for our lives. In fact, if there's one thing that is just simply assumed today, it's this, that you're in charge of your own life, and nobody should tell you what to do because you're in charge of your life. Well, so here's the issue. Maybe here's the problem. What happens if the people who think they're in charge don't seem very qualified to be in charge? What happens when those people who are thinking they're in charge aren't very qualified to be in charge? And how do we know they're not very qualified to be in charge? Because they're not making good decisions and choices from being in charge. And so therefore, we have what we talked about last week. We have a quarter life crisis that millennials are experiencing at age 25, 26, and 27. I mean, for 25 years of being in charge of their lives, they've been making enough, well, first of all, life is hard and life is difficult, so that's their context. But then in that context, they're making choices and decisions and coming to conclusions and beginning to align their lives around those conclusions, and they're not good choices, they're not good decisions, they're not good conclusions. And so therefore, at age 25, 26, and 27, they're already in emotional personal crisis, but they've been in charge. And then there's what, we also kind of understand as the midlife crisis. And there's different, arguments. Is that real? Is it not real? Hey, even if it's not exactly real, many of us do experience the repercussions and the consequences of having taken a lot more than 25 years to make choices that really weren't good choices. And we're now in those middle-aged years experiencing the consequences of bad choices. Now, I have no desire to harp on a couple of different issues. The only reason I mention a couple of these issues is simply because that's the stuff of our happiness. This is the stuff of flourishing. When you're looking at what makes people happy and what makes them unhappy, always in study after study after study, there's just a couple of things that come up. Your choice about health make you happy or not. Your choices about finances will lead to happiness or not. Your choice about sexuality will lead to happiness or not. Your choices about how you interact with the people who matter most in your life, that leads to great happiness or not. And so when we are thinking we are in charge and we're not necessarily qualified to really be in charge, we're not making good decisions about those four areas. And therefore the result is today more than ever in our culture, we deal with anxiety and depression and anger. That's the repercussion from you and I wanting to be in charge of our life, thinking we can be in charge of our lives, but not necessarily that qualified to make really good decisions on our own. Which is why I would like to suggest we could use somebody else to be in charge. Okay, here's the second item, and it's very closely connected to the first one, and that is there's always a king. Bob Dylan says it this way: you got to serve somebody. Here's the irony. This is kind of the mystery. We think we're in charge, but actually we're not. We're serving something else. We're serving somebody else. We think, but really there's something else that is more powerful, and we are sort of captivated by it. We are mesmerized by it. We are pulled in by it, and we are making our choices and decisions, conclusions around that other thing. Let me just give you one kind of silly, but also really, really serious illustration. I would like to propose to you that this is the modern God and King of our culture. Can I get an amen? Amen. Yeah, you know why? Because whenever this thing buzzes, beeps, tweets, sings, screams, shouts, what do? We pick it up. How many conversations have you been in where you're having a conversation, somebody's phone goes off, they take their attention away from you because their master's calling? Oh, it's the weather update. What's one of the very last things we do before we go to bed? Well, we check this and we put it down. And what's one of the very first things we do when we get up out of bed? We pick it up and we want to check how many messages did I miss while things were silenced. And this thing is controlling our lives. It's sort of omnipresent. We're really its servant. It's in charge. It's telling us what to do. Teenagers. On average, spend 8 hours a day, mostly on their phones. 8 hours a day. Now, they did a study of 1 million teenagers. This is striking. It wasn't a small study of 10,000, a study of 1 million teenagers. That study found the average teen spends 8 hours a day on their phone, mostly. A couple of other things as well, but mostly on their phone. But then they studied, so how many hours a day does a teen spend on their phone and how happy they are? And they had all sorts of criteria for what makes for happiness. And here's what they discovered. There's actually a sweet spot of the amount of time and maximum happiness for teenagers. Can you guess what it was? It was 1 hour a day on cell phone makes for the happiest teenagers in our culture. And somehow we parents are just oblivious. Well, are we even oblivious? We know they're not happy, but we don't know what to do about this God, this king, this in charge thing called their phone that's taking all their time and attention and making them miserable and probably making some of us miserable as well. Hey, now before we get all self-righteous about our teens, here's the bad news. Adults spend even more time on all kinds of social media and screen. And here's pretty fascinating. At work, the average white-collar worker spends 5 to 8 hours per week on personal screen time use that has nothing to do with work. You got to serve somebody, and we're not serving the right body. That's just one example. Number 3. Now I'm going to shift to 2 more reasons. Number 3. Jesus is not safe, but he is good. He is very good. Not safe, but good. Do you know where that language comes from? Anybody know? Yeah, the Chronicles of Narnia, the stories by C.S. Lewis about this make-believe world called Narnia, where there's a world of talking animals, and there's the great king over Narnia called Aslan, who's a figure of Jesus. And then in the first book in the series, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, they made a movie out of that, and the kids are going to visit Narnia, and in Narnia, it's always winter, kind of like it is in upstate New York right now. It's always winter, and it's never spring. But Aslan is on the move. Aslan's coming, and Mr. and Mrs. Beaver are describing to the children what Aslan is like. And as they're describing it, the children are a little bit scared, and they ask the questions, is he safe? And here's Mr. Beaver's response, safe? Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe, but he's good. I tell you, he's the king. Look, Jesus isn't safe. By not being safe, this is what I mean. You can't control him, you can't predict him, you can't tell him what to do, because he's in charge and you're not. And when there's a new king who's in charge and you're not thinking who's in charge, that just puts us in a little place of we're discombobulated. What's going on? He's not safe, but he's good. But because we still want to be in control, well, then we try to take this Aslan, CEO, and we restrict him, reduce him, confine him, contain him, constrain him, control him, manage him, limit him, So we can have a semblance of, well, yeah, even though he says he's in control, we still want to manage some kind of control. And in the event that we can't do that, then we turn around and try and crucify him and kill him and put him in the ground. But guess what? He doesn't stay there. He comes back out because he is in control of everything. He's not safe, but he's good. In fact, he's more than good. The scriptures don't even really use the language of good as much as it uses some other language. He is great. This one called Jesus, who is in charge of everything. He is greater than anything else you can imagine. And as you read through the Gospels and a few places else, you'll see, anybody that's mentioned in the Old Testament, Jesus is greater. He's greater than Abraham. He's greater than Moses. He's greater than David. He's greater than Solomon. He's greater than Jonah. He's greater than Elijah, the miracle worker. He's greater than all the prophets. He's greater than those individuals. He's greater than John the Baptist, who appeared on the scene doing amazing things that nobody had seen for hundreds of years. Jesus is greater than John. Jesus is greater than the temple itself. What's the temple? Well, the temple is a place where the presence of God is. The temple is a place where forgiveness of sin is obtained. The temple is a place of mercy and all good things. And Jesus is greater than all of that. He's greater than the angels. He's greater than Caesar and the Roman Empire. How do we know that? Well, because Caesar and the empire is gone and Jesus is still here, because Jesus is greater. And Jesus is greater than sickness, and he's greater than disease, and he's greater than sin, and he's greater than all the devils of the world. And Jesus is even greater than death. He's not safe. Oh no, but he is good. He is great. And that was the message of the Gospels. That's why they had to use language of like kingdom and king and Lord and majesty and sovereignty and crowns and thrones, because Jesus is greater than everything else. He should be in charge. But there's a flip side to that. And the flip side is very important. Who is this real Jesus? This greater than anybody else Jesus? Who is this real Jesus? Well, he's the servant king. He's not just any king, he's the servant king, so you can trust him. By the way, isn't trust the bottom line issue why we really don't know if we want anybody in charge of us? Because we don't know if we can trust the other person to have our best interests at mind. Hey, put up this little chart here. This was very recent. And what they were winding up doing is they were asking how much trust. Do we have a great deal of trust in these particular institutions? And I think you can probably see, but still at the top, we have a great deal of trust in the military and small business, and then it starts to drop down. And by the time we get down to the church, only 38% of the people have great trust in us. And it goes down, 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 down until, and by the way, this last one is true no matter what particular party is running Congress. Congress always ranks at the bottom of the list of people we trust. But why don't we trust people? Why don't we trust their leaders? Why don't we trust those who want to, who want to be in charge? Well, because we don't know if they're good people. We don't know if they mean what they say. We don't know if they're going to let us down or not. We don't know if they're going to come through or not. We don't know if their promises are going to deliver. In fact, what we're pretty sure about is they've overpromised and they've underdelivered. A lot of times they made promises that they had no intention of keeping in the first place. And so we've been disillusioned, we've been disappointed, and we just sort of say, I can no longer trust them. We don't want to trust them because we don't want to take the hit and the hurt from trusting and finding out we were foolish to trust in them. May I suggest that is exactly why you can trust Jesus, the servant king. Because he was one who took the hit and took the hurt so you and I don't have to. Where else are you going to find a king like him? Where else are you going to find somebody who can be in charge like that? He takes the hit, he takes the hurt, so you don't have to. He earned your trust. Oh, by the way, he didn't even need to earn it, but he went ahead and earned it anyway. That's why I think Jesus ought to be your CEO, Chief Everything Officer. So what does it look like for Jesus to be that CEO of your life, the one who's really in charge? Really simply, it means you love him. It means you listen to Jesus. It means you obey Jesus. It means you follow Jesus. It means you trust Jesus. That's simple. Just throw those 5 words and say, hey, am I doing those kind of 5 things? Because if you are, then Jesus is probably in charge of your life.